Today we'll ask several learning experts to share their thoughts about collaborative learning, which is also sometimes referred to as group or social learning. They'll discuss times they've experienced collaborative learning themselves and the design of their own interventions to promote collaborative learning in interesting ways.
I'm not a cognitive scientist, so I'm not sure that I know everything there is to know about collaborative learning, but I think from simple observation, it's obvious that a vast amount of what we learn through a combination of individual personal experience and group experiences. And even something that I might learn on my own, I think it only begins to make sense when I sort of try it out with somebody else. I say, I read this interesting book, or I heard this thing, what do you think about that? Or do you know anything about this? So I think any learning we do is done in a combination of individual experience and collaborative experience. And some things I think we only learn collaboratively. We do them in groups, and we wouldn't take them on if we didn't have a group around us to help us. So I don't think of collaborative learning and individual learning as totally separable and totally applicable to different challenges, but rather things that very much overlap. That most of what we learn through a combination of some individual experience or thought and some conversation, reflection, collaboration with others.
I think groups and social learning are really important, as is also the individual component. So we want to think very carefully on how we organize learning situation where there is some sense of individual agency of contribution, but it always needs to be situated in a larger social context, and this is where the group come in. And the group can mean your peers in the classroom, your peers in the school, but it can also mean peers and others outside in the online community. I think all of these are groups, and they present audiences which can be receptive to what you have learned. While most learning in school is kind of done towards a test or to the teacher, which are important groups or benchmarks as well, I think we often learn in interaction with others, whether it's face-to-face or whether it's online, and this is where the group idea, however it's conceptualized as a small or even as a massive community like many children encounter nowadays in the online space.
So I think there's a couple ways to think about it. I mean, one from a very just philosophical theory of truth kind of way. I mean, it's social in the sense that learning isn't typically recognized until it manifests itself in some form of behavior that is done in a setting, whether that be a test or a courtroom where you, display knowing something. So it always has to become manifested through an activity that is inherently done in the world, and then there are outside people who confer legitimacy on it.
Most of the things I found most provocative and most helpful and most supportive of learning have been around group and social learning, but part of this because my view of learning is deeply rooted in sort of social constructivist theories of learning, and this notion that we learn from context, we learn from each other. I'm a big believer in situated learning. So I'm naturally drawn to situations where people try to leverage place, and place isn't just stuff and surroundings, it's the people that are in the place. So no matter what level of education we're talking about, I appreciate it when there's some thought given into how we make use of each other's intellectual resources to make the whole greater than just the sum of the parts. Another theory that I'm a big fan of is distributed cognition. This notion that we plus our tools are way more intelligent and more effective than ourselves on our own. And the simple example that a lot of people turn to is like you and a pencil and paper are smarter than you by yourself because you and a pencil and paper can make a note.
Well, I'd like to share with you one story that had a profound role in my thinking about learning that has to do with collaborative learning. When I was early in my career doing research, I was studying how students can learn concepts in physics. And I wanted to have the kids talk so I could hear what they were thinking. And I didn't want to have to interview them all the time because I just felt intrusive. So just by accident, I thought, what if I put two students together And they'll talk to each other, and then I can study what they're thinking. I wasn't thinking about collaboration at that point. I just wanted to hear their thoughts. And so I did that. And I put two students in front of this simulation of physics and gave them a series of 10 tasks to do. And I wanted to see what they would learn about physics by doing this set of sort of like games on the computer. And what happened was this incredibly deep puzzle and surprise. I found the students learned a lot as they worked with the simulation, and they learned from each other. It was really clear that they were having a good time, they were working together, and they were learning from each other. But the puzzle was, if you looked at any snippet of their conversation, it was almost unintelligible because they were talking almost in a code, like, oh, look at that, it moves there. Oh yeah, and that means, and if you just listen to that, like, how did meaning get built out of that interaction? It's so vague. It's not like a teacher saying, and the principle of physics is. The kids never talked like a teacher would talk in physics. And so this became a big challenge for me to unpack what the process was that was allowing collaborative learning to work. And what I found through careful study of videotapes I had made and lots of interaction with other researchers who were expert in this, is that when students do collaborative learning, they're able to use gestures, the things they point to point at various things on the screen. So that was clarifying some of the meaning. And they're able to use metaphors, and they're able to complete each other's sentences in a way that they can tell that they're building towards the same idea. And so the environment played a really important role. And I came to think of the simulation. In the early days, I had thought of it as the simulation is going to give a picture of physics to the kids, and the picture was going to go into their head. And instead I became to think of it more like a coffee table book that they were both pointing to and talking about it. And as they talked about this book, it let them share ideas with each other. And so it became this environment that allowed the resources they had in gesture, talk, metaphor, other things to become effectively used to help them build meaning for physics concepts.
And then there's kind of the, I don't know, maybe more of a third way that I think about when I think about how teachers typically think about it, if I put on my teacher hat, which is that a lot of knowing and knowledge happens through kind of social interaction and reflection. And that is where you have, the canonical example would be two kids building, let's say they're building an astronomy model of like the Earth, Moon, Sun, and they're trying to show why there's, how eclipses work, and then they build the Earth, Moon, the Sun, and then they realize there should be an eclipse every month, you know, and then why doesn't that happen? And then they start arguing, and then they start doing things, and that's a very core kind of social thing, and you can think about that many ways. You know, one, maybe a kid all on their own would just set it up and they wouldn't ask other questions or be challenged. You know, there's a lot of different ways to think about it. And in terms of my work in social learning, a lot of what I've been interested in doing is trying to orchestrate those things kind of in that third bucket. So can we create situations where kids, implicit knowledge becomes explicit, where they have to debate and negotiate them, and then you get the social interaction either in a game environment or a different type where they're having to negotiate and argue those things.
I think there are many good examples of group learning. One which comes to mind is a knowledge forum, which also has been implemented widely in school classrooms and provides a great demonstration on how classrooms can serve as groups and leverage the use of social technologies like knowledge forums, like wiki-like concepts where individuals can pose questions, make contributions, critique each other, and help kids to kind of develop their own agency as well as a collective responsibility towards contributing towards a larger good. And I think it's this kind of tension between individual contribution and group as well as the responsibility towards a larger goal, which really drives learning most successfully in groups.
I certainly think collaborative learning doesn't require technology. We know kids building something together, playing a board game together, that there's plenty of collaborative learning going on. But I think if we're doing digital games or technology-based games, it's worth thinking about what particular affordances of that technology might assist with collaborative learning. That's why when we did Lure of the Labyrinth, which is more or less a single-player game, we nevertheless built in this mode of team play and a chat channel, because we knew that here in a game which a kid might be playing by themselves on a computer, there was a chance for them to actually talk to their teammates about how to solve problems. And so we sort of built collaboration into the game, which is something only technology could do. If it had been a book and kids were taking it home and reading it by themselves, it'd be much harder to encourage collaborative learning. But in an online game, you can sort of build that into it. Obviously, games can be designed to be multiplayer. And once a game is designed to be multiplayer, then by definition, there's going to be greater collaboration going on. I think newer technologies like mobile devices, tablets and phones, you can create turn-based games where the assumption is that players will pass the device from one to another, or games that connect on Wi-Fi, and so two players are playing together in the same room. And it's easy to come up, I should say it's easy, no design is easy, but one can imagine designing games in which part of the game was the conversation that's got to happen off the tablet, off the device, in order to solve the game. So I think the technology sort of create environments in which we can design for collaboration.
One thing I noticed with technologies for collaborative and social learning is there's many products that are starting to claim collaborative and social learning as one of their benefits. And to me that's exciting because it tells me there's a market for collaborative and social learning. And that's great because we can develop things for it. But I find many of the products, when you look at what they're delivering, it's a little bit weak. They're just providing a way for people to share assignments or to send messages to each other. And so when I think of collaboration, that's not what I think of. It's not sharing messages or coordinating resources, but it's about building something together. And so the technologies that I get excited about in collaborative learning are technologies which help students and their teacher to construct something. And so one technology that I think finally has perhaps reached its day now with the kind of tablets we have is something we developed years ago called Group Scribbles. And Group Scribbles lets a classroom of students build a map of their ideas and figure out how those ideas relate to each other. And they do it in a very simple metaphor of each making Post-it notes and putting the Post-it notes on a shared public board, and they can arrange them to show, for example, a dimension from left to right and organize their ideas. And so to me, that's collaborative knowledge building, not just coordinating a resource. The technologies that I'm excited about are the ones that allow kids to construct knowledge together.
So I mean, it's a great question, and it's something I think about a lot, because there are definitely times in the games we design that I just want a player to struggle with understanding what the game's asking of him or her, and that's really powerful. But it's so much more powerful when the game isn't doing so much to me, but you and I are trying to draw interpretations and build understandings of it. And in that sense, I think, a lot of times people think of the game as the teacher. Right. And I think about it much more as a boundary object that creates a context and a common context of which I'm getting feedback that can support a really interesting conversation where we're collectively interrogating what's happening there. And I feel like in many things, as soon as we move away from that we have this one world with a canonical truth and one way of seeing things and a hegemonic kind of perspective on everything, all of a sudden the world becomes contested, and then it's less about finding the truths and more about having experiences and understanding how I want to interpret that and the work that it's doing with me and with someone I'm interpreting with. So I think that when, even before games became multiplayer, my best memories are all like, sharing back and forth the controller.
Right. There are lots of opportunities in game design to design for collaborative learning. First of all, what kind of game do you design? If it's a multiplayer game, by definition, some collaboration ought to be going on. You can certainly create games in which players aren't just playing against each other, but actually need to work together to solve problems. You can create chat lines in a mobile game so players can talk to each other about the game while they're playing it. You can design games that are played turn-based at remote sites, and so players have to actually sort of communicate with each other turn by turn. It is possible to design games that are completely non-collaborative, that's clear. But it's just as easy, I think, to design games in which collaboration is just part of the game. It's nothing new. I mean, we've been doing that with board games forever, or card games. I mean, bridge is a good example. You can only play bridge with a teammate. You can't play solo bridge. And that's all about the rules of the game. So any game can have rules that require collaboration if designed properly.